But what I have a more serious problem with are the young earthers that want us to deny what we know from science. And as a result, they want us to ignore scientists when they tell us things like, take a vaccine for the pandemic.
And guess what? The science supported not getting the vaccine. Over 6 minutes later, we heard her say this. So now you don't want to even talk. So,
well, because you've brought up a topic that I was not prepared for. If I had known that this was going to be the topic, I would have brought facts and figures with me. But I did not know that this topic would come up. And so I did not bring any facts and figures with me. And I'm not prepared to defend that position.
But you brought these topics up.
I didn't. Well, okay. You're right. I did.
This is Apologetics Live. To answer your questions, your host from Striving for Eternity Ministries, Andrew Rappaport.
And we are live, Apologetics Live, here to answer your most challenging questions you have about God and the Bible. I am your host, Andrew Rappaport, the Executive Director of Striving for Eternity and the Christian Podcast Community, of which this podcast is a proud member. And just so you know, we are here every week, Thursday nights. Well, not every week. I shouldn't say that because we're not going to be here for the next two. But most weeks we are here at apologeticslive.com. You can go there to join the discussion anytime that we are live. We are try to do Thursday nights, 8 o'clock to 10 o'clock Eastern time PM. And you can join and ask us any question. In fact, I tell folks that I can answer any question you have about God and the Bible. And if you think that sounds a little bit, prideful or arrogant, just remember when I say I don't know, that's a perfectly good answer. I never said I'd give an answer that would be satisfactory to you. I just said I can answer every question. And I don't know is often the answer I give. So we have a guest backstage. We're going to be, as we said, we're going to be addressing a sermon from Tony Miano. Now, a lot of people have asked for an update on the church there in Iowa. I'm drawing a blank, but my guest will remind me. But we did a series in the past about this church where I was not really sure that it was a cult, but by listening to many people, I got thoroughly convinced. And Kevin said Grace Fellowship. I was going to say Grace Fellowship, but I wasn't sure if it was Grace Fellowship Church or just Grace Fellowship. But there in Iowa, we talked about this in the past. We actually did, I think, like 9 or 10 episodes on this, and a lot of people asked if we would give an update for years now. And we really didn't feel like doing an update. We had this sermon, I'll have to ask Kevin, for 2 or 3 years. We have talked about it, and we decided we would do it now. We'll explain a little bit why. Let me first get to some other issues that we have. I'll bring Kevin in so he can say hello. Kevin Yantz, how are you, sir?
Hi, Andrew. I'm doing well, thank you. Yeah, can you hear me all right?
Yeah, I wonder if there's a delay, but we'll see. If there is, it's going to be interesting. So first thing I got to do is correct something from last week. Last week we had the Roman Catholic in, and I kept referring to the Council of Nicaea in 324 having been the council that addressed the canon. And I was incorrect. I was wrong about that. I was thinking of the wrong council. And so I was making an argument that was, false. So I just wanted to correct that for the record. A couple things that we usually do in the news section before we get into the main subject, and let Kevin jump in as well if he wants any of these things. But just quickly, I want to hit some of these. There's another new school shooting at a Christian school, wouldn't you know? We have, it seems that conflicting reports, the sheriff or captain, whoever was doing the reporting early on with the school shooting, questions were asked whether the person was a transgender. And he made the comment to say, that's not an issue that we want to discuss right now, and that's not something we want to get into. So it made it sound as if he was trying to cover up like all of the other times that you had a shooter in a Christian school, and it was a transgender person doing it because of Christians. And so I did put out a post asking, when will the media and law enforcement call this a hate crime? Because they're clearly targeting Christian schools. It was interesting when a Muslim shot up a homosexual bar, they were quick to say it was a hate crime done by Christians, and then they found out it was a Muslim. In this case, what we have is some maybe questionable information. It's going to be hard to know. We're getting reports now that it wasn't a transgender. Early on, we did get reports that it was a transgender. Now we're getting reports that it was not. It makes it hard to know who to believe because, well, who's going to believe the media anymore? So I don't know if that's the case yet. It is interesting that this girl, I think, had a plan to end her life, because it seems that after the shooting, she had a friend who released her manifesto. Maybe it is because the last shooter had a manifesto on her and it never got released to the public. So that may be it. I did not get a chance to read that manifesto, so could not address that. What else in the news I'd like, actually, Kevin, anything you want to address with that or no?
Let's make sure I'm working first, Andrew. Can you hear me all right?
Yep, hear you fine.
Okay, good. I don't really have anything I could say about it. I've read a few things, watched a few things, but I mean, other than a horrible tragedy. And I think one of the things that I saw was highlighted was a number of issues with the drugs that kids take and why so many of these suicides are happening, which is a deeper issue probably.
That's the one thing they never want to look at. And yet that's the one thing that seems to always be in common, that they have these mood altering drugs to keep them calm in school, Yeah. The other one that I want to address, some may not even know this story. This is an 18, 19-year-old story, but there was a woman who made an accusation at she was a stripper. She went to a party hosted, I guess, by the Duke lacrosse team. She was on drugs at the time, had left the party early. I guess there were complaints or people insulting her about her dancing or whatever. And so she made the claim that she had been gang raped by the Duke lacrosse team. The only person, 3 people got named in a lawsuit. The only person she was able to identify was a person that was not at the party. He had a solid alibi. He was in another state. Charges were dropped. Now, almost 20 years later, she's finally come out and admitted that she lied about the whole thing. Why bring this up, Andrew? Good question. Glad you asked. This was the story that got the media from being like objective somewhat to just trying to convict people in the court of public opinion. This is the beginning of the Me Too movement. This is the beginning of all the things that we now see so rampant in the media, where they'll completely lie and all that just to get a news story out. So that's why this one is so important, because it is something that was the beginning of a lot of this stuff. It is something where it was a changing point in the media. And so I think it's important to recognize that those who were on the right that said this was something that was not true. It was, the woman was making it up. And if folks who may be too young or don't know the story, they did do a rape kit on her that night. They did discover that she had sex with 5 men, none of which are any of the Duke lacrosse players. So That's why they ended up throwing the case out. So one last thing that everyone is asking me, my thoughts on this. And I think a lot of people are asking because of my background, having worked for the federal government in the past. You know, there's a lot of questions about these drone sightings in New Jersey. It's like this phenomenon. Let me go through this very briefly, give you my opinions, what it could be. There's talk of, is it our own government testing things? That is possible. I mean, that's what Area 51 was all about. But they usually try to do that, yes, under the cover of night, but usually they try to do that in places where no one's going to see them. And if they try to do it sparsely so that it's not every night. So that would lead me to believe it's probably not that. You wouldn't usually do that in a heavily populated area because you don't want to be seen. They would do it somewhere in the desert. Now, maybe they're doing some testing of something that would go over water, so therefore it needs to go that way. But that's not the direction people are seeing. They're seeing them come across the center of the state, not going out to the water. It could be foreign actors. It's hard not to believe that when we had a Chinese air balloon just going across the country and no one wanted to do anything. And it was admitted that, yes, it was a Chinese air balloon, but they don't want it to come down on people. So I don't think it's that. With the number of them that are up there, I think the government would have done something by now. So what could it be? Well, let's give the more serious one. We did have someone, a mayor in New Jersey, that said that there is some stolen or missing uranium, and that these are, in his opinion, drones from the government that are looking for a uranium signal in fear of a small bomb that could be set off. Could that be the case? Well, it's plausible to an extent, but I find it hard to believe that there's missing uranium. That's not the sort of thing that goes just missing. So what do I think it is? Very simple. Here's what I think it is. It is a distraction. No different than when they were talking about all the UFO stuff, when they didn't want you knowing all the stuff that was going on in the government. I think this is just a distraction. And the more people are paying attention to it, the more they're not paying attention to all the things that are going on right now, like 1,500 pardons. More than 1,500 pardons is more, I think, than any president has done in their entire, administration. And he does that in a single day. He's pardoned, I think it's up to about 8,000 people. Wow. He's doing a lot of things to make it not to be a smooth transition of power, but people aren't noticing it because they're so focused on drones. So I think that's a lot of what it is. Could I be wrong? Sure. But I just think that's what it is. It's the media playing, folks. And I think it's some people that were doing it and as a distraction, and then more people jumped in and it's just a copycat. So let's look, before we get into our topic, I'll put this up. Jess had a comment that you have grown a serious beard. Thank you. I still have it. It'll be gone probably shortly. But Kevin, for folks who may not have joined, who have not been involved in the past, how about you introduce yourself a bit and let us know what you've been up to?
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. That's, we did, I think you said 9 shows. I didn't go back and count them, but we did a lot of shows on a former church that I was a part of. First of all, my name is Kevin Yount. I lived in Davenport, Iowa, grew up in the Quad Cities for the most part, moved away to Albuquerque.
Explain to folks what the Quad Cities are, because if you're not...
Quad Cities is it's on the Mississippi River, halfway between Des Moines, Iowa, and Chicago, Illinois. There's two cities in Iowa, actually 3 cities in Illinois, but they call it the Quad Cities anyway. So Davenport, Iowa, Bettendorf, Iowa, Rock Island, Illinois, and Moline, Illinois. So I grew up there through high school, moved to Albuquerque, New Mexico when I was 18, and went to school in Albuquerque, the University of New Mexico. Lived there, met my wife. We got married in 1991 and moved back to Davenport. Spent 28 years in Davenport, and that's where we became involved with Grace Fellowship Church, which is the topic of our discussions. So Jen and I, my wife, we became part of the church in 2008-ish, 2009-ish. We're part of it for 9 years. We left in February of 2018. And then we spent a year there and ended up moving back to New Mexico. So I live in Albuquerque, New Mexico now. We moved back here. My wife's family is from here. We kind of moved back here to help, with her aging mother and that kind of a thing. So here we are. We really didn't say anything about Grace Fellowship until a good year and a half, almost 2 years after we left. We came to realize that it was a spiritually abusive church, that the pastors and elders are of an authoritarian nature, quite authoritarian. And so I started writing a few blog articles about a book called Churches That Abuse by Ronald M. Roth. Didn't say anything about GFC in that process, but just wrote a series on that book. It was a helpful book for me at the time. It still is a helpful book. In this interim, we're still communicating with them a little bit. We had been excommunicated from the church about 3 or 4 days after we left. But Mike kept reaching out to me even later on and wanting to try to figure out how to reconcile. I would ask some questions about what that meant, and he wouldn't really answer me. And so basically we never did. They were insistent that we would come back to the church. We weren't going to put ourselves back in that situation. Grace Fellowship, and it is called Grace Fellowship Church, but I just call it GFC or Grace Fellowship. I don't really like to attach church to them. And so I began to educate myself on what this meant, because I really didn't know what we had been through. I didn't really understand it when we first came out, and I was ill prepared to actually deal with them in a way that I think would be helpful for us and for them. Didn't want to put myself back in that situation. And so the way we left was we left. We wrote a letter, said we were leaving, wrote some letters back and forth. They excommunicated us. We moved on, went to a couple different churches before we settled on one in Bettendorf. I wanted to grow in my understanding, so I applied for seminary and was accepted to the Reformed Baptist Seminary, and have been going to school. I've graduated with a degree program, and I'm pursuing another program. And then basically I began to write more articles naming them, because I thought it was important to talk about what was really happening at the church and, seek to expose the abuses. Now, if this was just me, if it was just my family, I probably wouldn't have ever said anything. But everybody that leaves the church, that is a member, is always, almost without exception, and I would say there might be one, possibly two exceptions. Now, the one exception I'm thinking of was later excommunicated, but they released him and then they said he was talking bad about them, so they came back and excommunicated them. But pretty much 100% of the people are excommunicated if they leave. So I wrote an article called...
He left the church, and then they excommunicated him when he's no longer part of the church.
That is correct. They released this man and his family from membership.
Did they, when they excommunicated him, did they start with talking to him one-on-one and then going with others, or was it just, boom, you're excommunicated?
Yeah, they came back and said, we've got all this evidence that said you've been divisive in your speech since you've left. We had released you on good, in good standing, but then you started saying things about us, and you started trying to encourage other people to leave and tell other stories about us. And so then they ended up writing him an excommunication.
Right? He wasn't a member anymore.
He was.
At the
point I mean, he was a member when he left, and they released him.
They released him, but you're saying this was, and the only reason I'm bringing this up is right. Matthew 18 is kind of clear. The steps. It would be done within the church, but the reason this becomes important is if he has left that church, and yet Mike Reed feels he could speak into this person to discipline him and excommunicate him from a church he already left. I find it interesting because part of Mike's argument is that none of us have that right to speak into his church.
Yeah. Well,
so would he have the right to speak into someone else's? It's interesting.
Yeah. Well, I mean, they kind of write their own rules. A lot of times they'll base them on how they would look at a scripture verse. So they try to justify it, I'm sure, somehow scripturally. But, I think if you let a guy go, I mean, do you have the right then to go back and excommunicate him later on? I don't even think they have the right to excommunicate somebody if they say, we have a disagreement here, we don't like how you do church, and we're going to leave, and we want to be released from membership. That's never good enough. That always ends in excommunication. And so I thought it was important to write about that, to say, I think they're abusing this doctrine that is a biblical doctrine. Excommunication, is the final step of Matthew 18, as you kind of pointed out, which is tell it to the church. If they don't repent, treat them as a heathen and a tax collector. And so, what does that mean exactly? Well, I think it means they're someone that you would then be willing to still continue to discuss and have conversations with and try to, minister to the gospel. You're assuming then that they're unbelievers. So, but they shun you. It's much like, perhaps Mormonism would shun somebody, or, the Amish would shun people. So, most people, when you leave and you've been excommunicated, you are, persona non grata. They want nothing to do with you. They will barely talk to you, if they'll talk to you at all. And the case in point in dealing with Tony is I saw him at the Starbucks that we both used to go to after we had left, after we had exhausted our conversations, and Tony was sitting there, and I walked in to get my coffee, and he wouldn't look at me. And I walked up to him and said, Tony, I've been coming to this Starbucks a lot longer than you have. And I don't care if you come in here or not, but don't act like you've never seen me before. And he sort of sheepishly looked up at me, and he stuck his hand out to shake my hand and grunted at me, and I walked out the door. Yeah. So, that's how you're treated. And so I thought it was important to start talking about these things. And then I did a series, 3 articles, one on people's testimonies, one on, looking forward to what can we do about the future and stuff like that. But I've continued to highlight them through the years.
For folks that don't know, what's the blog site for folks?
Yeah, the blog site is called uncommonfaith.org. And I've been writing on that blog since 2012, I guess. So, 12 plus years. And interestingly enough, I was at GFC at the time and asked Mike permission to start a blog. And, I think he liked it at the time because I'd run my articles past him and he'd always approve them. And now he's probably not a big fan, but, the blog, it's not a big deal, right? It's just me sort of putting down stuff that I think about. It's become more of a sounding board to highlight abuses at GFC when I hear of more stuff going on there. If I think it's important enough to write about it, I'll write about it. Like the man that committed suicide at GFC. I thought it was important to write about that and give his family and friends some sort of a better understanding of his life than what they talked about at his funeral. It was a really disturbing and disgusting way to give a funeral. So I wanted to tell people, listen, man, this guy was loved. I mean, we ran into him after we had been excommunicated at a grocery store, and he talked to me, and he had his daughter, and he was friendly, and then he told them that we were there, and he got a beat down for it. I'm sure he felt helpless. I don't know the full nature of his suicide. I don't want to try to, make speculations or anything like that. He was a wonderful man, and it was a shame what has happened to him and his family. And I'm told his wife has left and moved out of state now, which I praise the Lord for that. But that's an overview, Andrew. It's a long story, and we could spend a lot of time talking about it. But
we spent many hours on this. In fact, what I want to do is I'm gonna so folks could know some of what you have written on Striving for Eternity. I want to bring up the article, the main article, for folks to be able to find, because the reason I want to do this is, if folks want to get all the background, this is the one place to get it. If you go to strivingforeternity.org, and just do a search for dangerous doctrines, you'll find a couple of articles that Kevin has written that's at Striving for Eternity. And this one is the really the detailed one. It's the dangerous doctrines of Grace Fellowship Church. And what you'll see in this, as I'm just going to scroll up, is these are all the episodes that we covered. So you can watch either the video or listen to the audio. And this episode we're doing right now will be on it. And so Anthony had started this. This is where really we dealt with the issues of, where was it? Was it earlier than that? Yeah, I think it was all the way it was in part 6 before we really started bringing up where I kind of came in, and we compared what Tony and I and others did when talking about the Church of Wells, which Tony recognized as a cult, and we compared it. And Kevin, you were very helpful with that to show the church he's currently in was fitting some of those same things that Tony previously had criticized. And so
it's pretty shocking, really, the comparisons, all the things. I mean, that was a 3-hour video that he did with some other men. I don't remember who that was, but it doesn't matter at this point.
Yeah, it was myself, Kevin, Ken Cook, and John Speed.
Oh, right. Yeah.
That were on there.
Okay.
So here we did 9 episodes here. And then this article will explain some of the details, but I want to start with the way we started every one of these others. And I just want, for the record, we invited Tony in here. It's something where I did not want to just make claims. You're going to hear, I'm going to play a video clip of Tony that I sent to him, because I want him to be here. I would rather him or Mike Reed. They've always had the invitation here to join us. And so I would rather them come in and we have the discussion. Truthfully, I'd rather we have the discussion behind the scenes, having a fair discussion, and we could do that in private. But unfortunately, that's not the way they have behaved. I actually did one of those episodes. I went back and forth with the emails that Mike Reed was sending me, and it was just kind of sad to see that behavior. But these are the things that we had asked each week. 12 questions that we had, and since I didn't have them memorized, I figured I'd bring this up. And you guys can read this. It is kind of interesting, I did go and do a search for Tony Miano, just to see, because as you and I were talking, Kevin, in prep for this, I was trying to find some stuff that we had from the past, and I was trying to find something from Tony's own website, and Striving for Eternity was coming up on the first page, unlike every search engine, when you search for Tony Miano. So, I mean, that is the advantage of having a website that gets a lot of traffic. And so as we read this, here's what the questions that we asked. And this is the questions we asked every week for those of GFC, Mike Reed, if they could answer, because these were the concerns that we had. And this is exactly what Tony and I and Matt Slick did with the Church of Wells. We came up with questions we wanted them to answer, just yes or no type of questions, very simple things that can be answered. So the questions to Mike were, do you meet with women alone on a regular basis? I mean, that's a yes or no. Do you ask for details about spousal intimacy? That's yes or no. Have you ever said, quote, to trust the elders, unquote, is to, quote, to trust God, unquote? Number 4, have you ever said whatever the elders would counsel you for your life is perfect? Number 5, have you ever said that GFC is the only true church in Quad Cities? That's a yes or no one. And that's going to become very interesting later in this episode. So remember that question, whether they claim to be the only true church. Tony's going to have some words about that, but not what you might think. Number 6, do you believe the elders have a, air quotes, nearly unlimited authority in the lives of their congregants? Number 7, have you said if someone owns a gun, is in the military or police, they have premeditated murder in their hearts? Do you share details about counseling? This is number 8. Do you share details about counseling sessions with other members? Number 9, do you ever imply that men and women should be able to kiss someone on the lips that is not his or her own spouse? Number 10, have you ever shared details of your own sexual intimacy with any of the people in your counseling sessions with members of the opposite sex? Number 11, do you believe you are infallible against sexual immorality? And number 12, by name, what specific pastors, theologians, and or teachers have condoned the practice of meeting with women alone in counseling sessions? Now, last one obviously is not something that is a yes or no. But with that, I just figured we should start asking the same questions we asked the last 9 episodes. And the reason being is you can see from these questions the seriousness of the accusations. Even if this is the first time that you are hearing about this, some of the issues that we saw throughout with many people that came in publicly and gave testimony, but also privately, is that Mike Reed, the pastor there, would meet regularly with women alone. He would ask them about their sexual intimacy with their husbands, how often they have sex, what positions, things like this. And if they're not comfortable, he would start sharing what he and his wife do. They were known because they believed in kissing on the lips. That's weird. And this is what most people say about the church. I mean, those that know Tony, they go, the church he goes to is weird, but not necessarily sinful. I agreed with that. I mean, that was my position before Anthony did this investigation. And if you go back and listen, Anthony called it a cult. And I went, whoa. Because Anthony didn't run it by me with everything he was doing. He asked whether he and Kevin could do some discussion on this. And it was like, wait a minute. Like as Anthony started bringing in people, I started realizing, no, they do have the control over people, and they're asking things that no pastor should be asking of anyone. Yeah. Now, I want to say up front, I used to have a good relationship with Tony. We were friends. I valued that friendship. One thing that if you talk to anyone who knows Tony, every single person that I know that knows Tony has pretty much said to me the same thing, that Tony Miano was their best friend. That should make you wonder, dozens and dozens of people have said that to me. And I felt it too. And that is the type of person Tony Miano is. He makes you feel like you are his best friend. Even though we have not spoken in years, I'm sure that's still his personality. He's a very lovable person. He is someone who just really has a lot to as far as encouraging people. And
when I first met Tony at the Shepherd's Conference in 2015, it was just as you said, Andrew. He was so kind to me and so engaging. And, a lot of times if you have conversations with people and you're in a crowd, you'll see them looking away at other people, at what's going on. Tony would not do that.
Yeah.
He would look at you and he would give you his full attention. That's an admirable quality. And he brought me a book that he had written. I told him my dad was a police officer. He brought me a book. He autographed it. He signed it. You're spot on. And that's why Tony is beloved by so many. Yeah.
Now, Melissa's saying this, it sounds like grooming. No, I don't think so. I don't think that I understand why she would think that, but obviously I don't know Tony's heart, but I don't think it was look, Tony had really strong convictions about the barriers between men and women. So I would find it hard to believe that he would have grooming technique. Grooming is usually to gain favor, to hold control over people. One of the things, Tony's kind of, people think of him as this bulldog, as a leader, and he has some of those qualities. But Tony has always been someone who has submitted to others. When I met him, he was at Living Waters. He submitted to the authority of Living Waters very much, to the point where he wouldn't talk publicly about some of his views, specifically his Calvinistic views. He wouldn't speak about that because that was not what Living Waters wanted. And even in private, he would not do that because he respected that authority. When he went and started working after he left Living Waters, he worked for Karma for a bit. It was the same thing. Then he started working with Jeff Rose, and now he's in this church. So where a lot of people think of Tony as a leader, he has those qualities, but Tony's not the guy that is out in front. Tony's always the guy that is under somebody, and it's admirable. He's under somebody and then leading that way. So
yeah, if you listen to that sermon that we're going to discuss, you will see the obvious love and admiration for Mike Reed and for his eldership, for his pastors. Now, that's a misplaced love. It's bordered on, it is cultish, and he's so far over the top on that by what he says. It's crazy to me, but you're exactly right, Andrew.
Yeah, and I'm trying to see if I can grab. I want to grab some of the comments that people are putting, because we're going to say some negative things, and I don't want it to be all negative, because Tony has really touched a lot of people's lives.
Yeah,
and we wish he would come out of this church. We think it's bad. I know I know people who have contacted Tony, trying to reach out to him after we did that series, and people came back to me and told me just mentioning my name was enough for him to just block them. He canceled them, just delete all relations, even people who were very close to him.
Yeah.
So, but
I mean, I think that's a significant sign that you are in a cult when you will just cancel people because they'll bring any sort of question about what you're doing and what you're involved in.
yeah. So, you know, I'm trying to look for some. Okay, so here's one. He is saying, I met Tony in person at the Ambassador Academy several years ago. He took my photo when I did my first ever open air sermon while on the 3rd Street Promenade. Let's see. Melissa said, I never met him in person, but he was doing the Bible reading on chat on YouTube, which is, you know, he's been doing that. I think he's still doing that. So that's going on for like probably 7-8 years, I think. Yeah. Jesse says here, I remember Tony gave out his personal phone number to everyone at the Ambassadors Academy. Yeah, that's who he was or is. And then this was D said, Tony Miano went to GFC. I had a lot of respect for Tony, especially with his boldness in evangelism, critiques of NAR, and seeker-sensitive stuff in the broad church. So I wanted to put positive things up so that people would see Tony was and is well loved. Oh, I'm sorry. Melissa said I meant my pastor, not Tony. So maybe I pulled that one out. All right. So, and it's going to be hard without Drew here to keep up with all the comments. I'm going to try. So if you guys keep seeing me looking over that way, that's why. So, you know, what you end up seeing, you know, well, like Stephen is saying here, Stephen was backstage, but he is just watching. He said, Tony has blocked most of the evangelicals here in Iowa, a few of them in Illinois. And this is the behavior. And so I'm just saying that to say folks are going to go, well, I want to go reach out to him. Well, if you do, this is, you know, expect to be blocked.
Yeah. So let me quick add in, you know, Steve Johnson is a friend of mine. He's still back in the Quad Cities. He encounters Tony and GFC at a community college called Black Hawk. It's over in Rock Island, Illinois. And, you know, and at another college, Augustana, they can't stand Tony over there. And it's gotten a lot of traction. But one of the comments we're going to hear in one of the audio clips is Tony talking about the people being across the street and not having the courage.
Let's get into it. Let's play.
Sounds good.
Because we've done a pretty good amount of setup, and so I want to get to some of these clips. So let's start. What I want to do is you had 3 longer clips, and then I had some shorter ones. So that some of them are in yours. So I'm going to play the first clip is to almost 2.5 minutes. So this is a longer clip, but I'm gonna play it in its entirety and then let you comment through the 3 clips. So here we go.
For 6 years now, my church.
And I'm gonna hold on. Let me stop this again. I should mention from the beginning. You're gonna hear poor audio quality on this, and I had no control over that. I did try to boost it as much as I could. I believe, just my guess, is that he is speaking at a church with a mic that is stationary, and he's turning his head, because you're going to hear his volume going up and down, up and down. I'm sorry about that. I had tried to equalize it as best I could and increase the volume as best I could. So sorry.
And we may also mention, Andrew, that this was done, I think, in 2022.
This was done really in 2022. I believe this was in response to. So what happened was he went out to California, I believe was the case. He was going to a church. They wanted to do some outreach with Grace Community Church, but Grace Community Church had concerns after we did. Anthony started doing the podcast series, and they just made the decision not to have him out with them on their evangelism team.
That's right.
And they did a response video. Of course, it was a response video that they sent only to specific people responding to us. Now, you were able to get that response video. We did watch it. We've talked about whether to respond to the response video, but the reality is the response video didn't deal with any of the accusations that were made on this show.
No.
So we decided there was no reason to respond. So, all right, so let's play it. Here we go.
For 6 years now, my church, my pastor, me and my family have been reviled by a group of wolves who named the name of Christ, call themselves Christians, who would even probably dare to have the word churchman come out of their mouth, but they're cowards, right? To a man and to a woman. They're cowards. They have publicly excoriated me and my church and my pastor, all under the auspices of the love of Christ and the love for the church, while doing everything in their limited power and limited reach to try to destroy one of Christ. But what these people have intended for evil, God has used for such great good. Amen. The evil that would call my daughter here in California at work, so never having met my daughter, knowing nothing about my daughter, knowing nothing about her own spiritual condition or walk with Christ, knowing nothing about her relationship to her father, and would call her at work and say, your dad is involved in a cult. Hell. The evil that after I was arrested for the second time outside of an mortuary in Iowa and in desperate need of legal representation. The evil that would track down who my attorney was, share videos and blog posts and articles with him, and convince that attorney to drop me. For the glory of Christ, of course. Right? For the love of the church, of course. They will know we are Christians by our love for one another. Right? The evil that would take my own wife's testimony as to how.
Okay, so that was the clip, and we're going to get into more detail with that. I just want to give a quick overview on 3 points before you get into this, and we're going to have to keep it somewhat short with these because there's a lot there, and we're going to break it up into smaller sections later, but so we won't say everything now. But first off, you can go back and look at what Tony did with the Church of Wells. The very things that we've done, I mean, and Kevin, you could testify to this, that when this whole thing started and Anthony started talking about it, and we had a meeting, and I said, well, if we're going to do this, I want it to follow the same pattern we did with Church of Wells. I want questions, you come up with clear accusations. Here's some questions that must be answered. And that's the 12 questions we read. So Tony's calling us wolves for doing behavior he had done in the past.
Yeah.
The other thing is, and I asked this of you, and I asked this of Anthony, because he's saying the wolves that do this podcast. Have you ever called, Tony's daughter or his lawyer or any churches?
No, I've never done that.
I asked it of Anthony, so let me read exactly what Anthony said so that I get him verbatim with what he had said. So I asked him the same question. I asked him, have you ever called any of the churches warning them about Tony, or called his lawyer or his daughter? He said, not once. I did have one church reach out to me after watching the videos. It was a church that had hosted Tony 1 or 2 times in prior years. The pastor had already heard about Mike Reed and Tony Miano's involvement in the church, and had also watched the videos. He called me after getting my number from a friend, I'm going to leave that name out, to just verify the information that we gave in the videos. So it wasn't that Anthony called any of these people. One church called him. Okay.
Mhm.
So I just want to put that in for the record. When he said that, he's attributing it to the podcasters, and yet none of us did that.
Yeah. I can't say that I know who called those people. I'm sure probably somebody did. I don't think he'd lie about it.
Oh, I don't think so. But
yeah,
it's us. What I'm
I mean,
saying.
I wouldn't do that. I've been very clear, very open in my criticisms. I've given, we've given opportunities for response to those things, but their response is a private video, not a public video. So, we could critique that video because I do have a copy of it now, but not necessary, as you pointed out. But why would I need to do that? I don't.
Yeah. And so I just wanted it clear that, we want to be accurate. And look, folks, when we put this up, I think, last week or very, very early this week, if it was Sunday at the latest, I think, I sent an email to both Tony and the church, letting them know we were going to do this and ask him to come on. And I sent him a clip that I'll play later. Anthony did want one thing for me to mention. He said this. He said, "We merely reported findings and had guests on that confirmed them. When you address these things, you can remind people that we have Tony and Mike Reed. We have." I think he meant given Tony and Mike Reed opportunities to come on the show. I offered to even pull I offered to even pull a liberal media / karma stunt to give them all a questions ahead of time. I know what that's referring. He was gonna give them all the questions he would ask up front, so they'd have time to look at them, and Anthony agreed that he wouldn't ask anything outside the questions he would send them. So continue with what Anthony said. Mike agreed to let me have access to Tony, which he reneged on, and he also initially agreed to coming on Apologetics Live, and then also reneged and blamed it on his other elders. So that's what just Anthony wanted that for the record. And so yeah. So let me play this second clip, unless you had anything you wanted to add on as a high level overview.
No, we'll dive into some of the specifics, I'm sure, as we go. So.
Okay, so this is a second clip from that same sermon, and this is about 1.5 minutes.
And twisted and make it something it wasn't on a podcast in other conversations, and trample underfoot the blood of Christ at the expense of my bride's testimony. The evil that would be out handing out tracts at a 4th of July parade and see a lady who's a member of my church and accuse her of being a member of a cult and warning people up and down the parade path that don't take their tracts, they're a cult. Seeing me across the street but lacking the spine to come across and talk to me. That kind of evil. The evil that would abandon the so-called brother in arms. Fellow soldier out there on the street, and abandon him and not say a word to him for 6 years. But fear, I'm sure, for some of getting a little bit of the mud on them. That kind of evil. That kind of evil that Brother Paul has been so great. God has used good, amen, in my life, convincing me all the more of the evangelist's biblical responsibility.
Okay, so in that, with that, he calls it evil for the twisting of his wife's testimony was the main part I think you wanted in that. Is there anything else you wanted? I mean, we'll get into some of this. He plays the victim of how these people mistreated him, not spoke to him. Mind you, Tony has had ample opportunity to speak to me and has yet to do that. He knows my number. He knows my email. I know for a fact what he says about me, because what he doesn't know is someone called me up while on speakerphone with him as he was berating someone about me. So I know what was said. And it's interesting because those are things he never said to me. Okay, so we'll get that in more detail. But I did want to put this up for you, Kevin. This is, I had to find this on an archive, and I was glad that I finally found this. But this was the important announcement of him going to the church there. Okay. And this is the article where he says, people were twisting and the evil of, twisting his wife's testimony. Well, I'll challenge folks to go back and look at what we said. It's in this article, everything that we said. So, he ends up saying that his wife questioned her salvation. Let me see if I could find it. I should have just had it right up. But this is the article where he said that his wife, who had been saved for many years, started questioning her salvation, which is what we said. So it's hard to know how we twisted his own words. Now, the fact that this on the website was edited, well, that's not on us. And the reason I didn't have this article years ago, just for people to understand, there was an article on the website. I know many people had sent me the article. People were like, concerned because they saw this article, and the article was talking about his wife questioning her salvation. And so, maybe this is the wrong article. Hold on.
Well, I'm going to just say something real quick.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, that's the right one. But back to the previous one, you don't have to go back there. But it mentioned the language that he uses, referring to his pastors and elders and how they wanted to help him mature. All this kind of language that he uses in this is the same stuff he's saying today.
And that's the emphasis of what I want this show to be on. Is just what you just said. And that's why I had this one up, and I just had it in the wrong order. So let me do this one. So this is where he talks about that he and his wife returned home from Grace Fellowship Church, right? He talks about that they had a week of intimate fellowship, right? It was a good week. He'll talk about the fact that he recognized, while he was there, some sin in his life, and this gets into why we brought this up. Like, why are we discussing this now? A part of it is because he's got a new book out, and he was on a video here with Your Calvinist Podcast, a friend of mine. And so talking about that brought it back up to light. Some of the things show that he had admitted to, and this isn't slander. He had admitted to it on Your Calvinist, and I guess in his book, that he had an addiction to prescription drugs. Maybe that's what was the sin. I don't know. I don't know the full timeline. But in here, he talks about right here his wife Maria's reaction to their time at GFC. And she struggled with thoughts. And this is the reason we talked about her testimony, is because here is where he starts to talk about that. He says here at the bottom, I believe her confession was brought about by a week of being confronted by holiness. What confession? That she may not have been saved for 27 years.
Oh my gosh. I mean, I've read this before, okay, but if you scroll up just a touch, Andrew, I want to read that one paragraph about legalism. It says, Maria's reaction to our time with the GFC family was more intense. Maria struggled with thoughts about GFC, which included thoughts of legalism. While she was blessed each day, yada, 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 she struggled with the thoughts that something was wrong, wasn't right, legalism. And then, here's the thing, right? women are far more in tune to this type of stuff than men are. For someone like Tony, and I will include myself in that thing, you know, if we have a good connection with another guy and we think, you know, this is a guy that I wouldn't mind, you know, I could be friends with, I could hang out with, we have similar interests, stuff like that. I'm sure Tony was enamored with Mike right off the bat. You know what? Maria had it right. Her initial instinct was spot on. And what happened is it got twisted. And this is what Mike is so good at doing. And he is so clever. And he will have to get you unsaved. And he can do it by digging up past sins, by prying into your life and exposing things in you that you may not even thought about for a long time. He just knows how to question people and get into them. And then he'll get them unsaved so he can resave them. And he's done that with so many people. And it's a repeating pattern. And listen, I don't know Maria very well. I couldn't tell you with beyond a shadow of a doubt that she was saved or unsaved or whatever. I don't know. But what I know is that's a pattern. And when she identified it from the get-go, something's off with this place. Boom, she nailed it. And if Tony would have been wise, and this is the lesson that I've learned for my own life with my wife, is she sees things differently than I do. And you know what? We're one flesh. And rather than me having to be above her, we need to be together, and we need to be working together for a common cause, which is the good of our family and the love of the Lord. And I need to trust her instincts in that area. And that's what they are so good at tearing apart in men and women, is this authority umbrella, this nonsense that came out of Bill Gothard. You know, I won't mention other names that use this kind of stuff, but it's very fundamentalist, very cultish, very holiness movement, very intense shepherding movement, all this kind of garbage. And you know what? Maria saw it. So they had to expose her as being unsaved in order to get her saved.
Well, this is the exact thing that Tony criticized with Church of Wells. This is the same pattern they did, is that they would go into people's homes, that, you know, as they would travel around doing open air, stay in people's homes. And their pattern was to try to isolate either one of the children or even a spouse. And what they would do is they had this pattern of occupying the family while one person was being separated. Yeah. That person that was being separated was being caused to doubt their salvation and question their salvation until they talk to these guys at the Church of Wells, and then they get saved. And, oh, you should really be at Wells where we're really doing things holy and doing things right. And that's what they would do. So yeah, that pattern is there.
Which is why they got Tony to back off of Wells.
Yeah. Why don't you tell that?
Yeah. So we discussed it on that Wells podcast. I think we did 2 or 3 parts of it because it was a long 3-hour video. I remember clearly that one young man that was exposed, and they did all that, you know, they did that to these families. But long story short, at the time Tony started coming to Davenport, he was still hot on the trail of Church of Wells. Like, he was going to go there. He was going to confront them. He was going to do all this stuff. He was writing articles about them. Imagine that. He was doing YouTube videos about them. He was adamant about bringing down maybe Church of Wells. Well, he moves to Davenport. I'm having lunch with him, Mike Reed, Tyler Bolkema, who's one of the other elders there. They call them pastors now. They used to call them elders. Now they're pastors. So we're sitting around, we're talking, we're having lunch. Tyler wasn't an elder at the time. So kind of me and Tyler are kind of the guys that are being mentored by Mike along the path. And Tony was there, and somehow this topic comes up, and Mike says something to Tony like, you know, we have a lot of similarities of Wells. We could be accused of being the same as being Church of Wells. And after that lunch meeting, I never heard a thing again about Church of Wells. And I have no proof of it. I have no evidence of anything other than the fact that, boom, man, Tony all of a sudden stopped talking about Wells. And if I know Mike Reed, and I know Mike Reed fairly well, they had that conversation. He's like, I think you should back off. And no evidence of that, but other than the fact that you never heard a thing again about it from Tony.
Yeah. And I the little I know of her, I agree with Kevin McDonald says, Kev, she was a model of humility in our study in 2015, a model of Christian maturity.
I believe it. She's a kind and sweet woman. I have no doubts.
Chuck O'Neill is saying that's right. Kevin McDonald, she was a godly, sweet Christian woman and a member of Grace Community Church until she met Mike Reed. And so I mean, I can't speak to Maria because I met her, I think, only once or twice. I didn't know her well. She came off very sweet, but I have no reason to question that. So let me play the last of the 3 longer clips. This one is over 2.5 minutes, and then we're going to dig a little bit deeper into them.
So that was the little elephant in the room. And I'm not going to spend any more time talking about it. I hope and pray that some of those wolves, some of those revilers, some of those men and women who name the name of Christ while hating segments of his bride and some of his people, I hope they'll hear this message today. I'm sure they will, because they troll my pages. They contact every church that asks me to preach and discourage the pastor for daring to ask me to come and sending them videos and blogs and podcasts. Pastor Matt experienced that. Brother Paul has experienced that. Other churches have experienced that. All that kind of evil God has used for good. And part of that good was to remove me in many ways from this so-called community. A band of nomads who may or may not have some tacit connection to the local church, no connection at all. God has set me free from so much. Amen. And he's used these last 6 years under the love and care and shepherding of my pastors and my church family to show me sin in my own life, to show me how much I sin. So what I'm about to present to you is far less a sermon than it is. And I hope it ministers to someone. I hope it ministers to churchmen. I hope it ministers to those who think they're churchmen and are not. And I hope it ministers to those who flat out say, I'm not a churchman, and I don't. Now, considering the topic I have been assigned, the evangelist's responsibility to the church, a topic I've addressed many times in different formats, I thought the best service I could bring to you today, if you see yourself as an evangelist, is to consider almost 2 decades of mistakes that I've made.
So that's the longer clip. By the way, that he said that a topic he has addressed many times. I think the first time he addressed that topic might have been at Jersey Fire, an event that Striving for Eternity hosted. And the term nomad, although he takes credit for the term being created by him, and he, to an extent he's right. We were specifically, Tony and I discussing at the time, people that didn't have a church home, traveled around, preaching on streets and not going to church. And Tony and I were discussing that, and I said, we need to come up with some sort of name that describes them. And he called me back and said, I have the name Nomad. So he takes credit for it, and he came up with the name. I agree. But he makes it sound like it was something he did all on his own, and that, not exactly. But so he says that about people calling up churches. Now, we've already addressed that Kevin, myself, and Anthony, who did the podcast that he calls us the Wolves, we did not call up churches. But Kevin, do you know who actually did call up some churches? His name is Tony Miano.
Yeah.
Yes, Tony Miano, when he left Living Waters, was working for Carm, writing articles about Mark Cahill, who was again, a friend. He at the time he just has gone kind of off the rails on Calvinism. He actually is a Calvinist. He just doesn't know it because he has a wrong definition of Calvinism. And he was blasting Tony for Tony's views on Calvinism. When Tony went to CARM, he wrote many articles that are still up on CARM, I believe, on Mark Cahill and Calvinism. He then went and called every church that Mark had on his website, contacted them, and said that they should remove him because he's a problem. Tony did that. Tony did that to me as well. For folks who don't know the history, we it's been several years since we did the first episodes, but the reason I started going to Shepherd's Conference is because Tony and this is how Chuck O'Neill and I got to meet. Basically, what happened was Tony was saying things about me. He was not really wanting to talk to me about it, but talk about it to others. He was calling churches in different places where I had events, and he was contacting them to get me uninvited, and he succeeded in some. One that I had was a long-standing thing in the Super Bowl outreach. I used to lead teams there all the time. And so I went out there, and we went out. I went there for the purpose of reconciliation. So he wasn't responding to phone calls, emails. So I flew across the country so that I could see him face to face. It took me 3 days to finally find him. I said, "Hey, brother, can we meet?" He agreed. He wanted to have Chuck O'Neill as his accountability pastor, or he had an accountability group. Chuck was on that, and I said, "Fine, I'll bring Anthony." And so the four of us met. The reality is, Chuck ended up apologizing to me for siding with his friend at first, because he ended up realizing that the things I said were right. He actually, in the meeting, had admitted that Tony was wrong with judging my motives. And, and then at that point, Tony kind of switched gears. But Tony had done these very things, but he accuses the three of us of doing it. And we did not do that. But that is Tony's behavior. So whether it happened or not, I don't know, but I could picture it being something where Tony is expecting it to happen.
Yeah. What is interesting about all of that is, you practiced Matthew 18 and it was successful to some degree. And what GFC has accused us of is not practicing Matthew 18, not going to them, not talking about these things, not reconciling with the church, which I do want to address, which is just not true.
Yeah, let's address that, because we have a bit, right? We've invited both, Mike Reed and Tony Miano on from Anthony did it on the very first episode.
Yeah,
we did it through several times throughout. And I think every episode, either Anthony or I would do a public appeal for them to come. I sent an email. You know this because I told you ahead of time. I sent Tony and the church an email inviting them on, and I'm inviting them on now. If you want to address these things, I would love to get answers to the 12 questions that Anthony and Kevin came up with.
Yeah, it's easy for them to take cover under the fact that, we did it wrong. We sent them a letter and scurried out the door and never talked at all about anything that was going on. But, I had 4 separate meetings with Mike, person one-on-one with him. And those meetings were about what I perceived at the time. I called it legalism. I didn't know what else to call it. I've matured a lot in my understanding of this kind of a situation. I've educated myself. And so I didn't know, we wanted to try to be respectful because we were still members in good standing at the time. I still considered Mike my pastor, my friend, my mentor on many levels. So I wanted to approach it in a respectful way. We always ended with some kind of an agreement about things. It was always Jen and I's hope that the church would change and change directions. But we could see that after the fourth meeting, and then I sent a follow-up email on some certain things, and we had a discussion in an elder meeting because I was a deacon at the time. We had, Mike knew things were stirring and going on inside of us. And so we had also observed how people had left in the past, and it never went very well. It never went well at all. In fact, it not only not went well, it went terrible. It went poorly. It was, slash and burn. It was always destructive. And so we knew from past experiences, the only really way to leave an authoritarian environment, which is what now we understand it to be, is to leave, and just leave and don't look back. And we've received that counsel from so many people that are trusted men, have godly ministries, been in ministry a long time. Just leave, and that's what we chose to do. So they will try to say that we didn't do that, we didn't practice these things, but it's not true.
Yeah, and let me play the specific clip that shorter segment of that. This is the one that I sent to Tony in the email, because I figured maybe if he hears himself in his own words, he would come on here for the discussion. And here it is.
The evil that would be handing out tracts at a 4th of July parade and see a lady who's a member of my church and accuse her of being a member of a cult and warning people up and down the parade path that don't take their tracts, they're a cult. Seeing me across the street, but lacking the spine to come across and talk to me. That kind of.
So he says twice that is an evil. He considers that an evil.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the challenge is out for Tony Miano. Do you lack the spine to call me up? Do you lack the spine to come on here and defend your church's positions? If the church isn't doing it, those questions that were asked were yes or no. Tony, if you're watching, you know what we chose to do with having yes/no questions for Church of Wells, so that there wasn't any way where they could do their games of using the twisting of words and long talking and red herrings and never getting to the topic.
Mm-hmm.
That's why we wanted, and I think it was Matt Slick's idea, they had to be yes or no questions. We did the same thing here. That was the thing I said to Ken. Now, granted, there's one or two that aren't yes or no, but I had said the same thing. There's got to be yes, no questions, not something that needs explanation. Just yes, we did this, or no, we didn't. Do you lack the spine to come on here? These are your own words, Tony. You call it evil to lack the spine for someone to not come and talk to you when they're willing to talk to others about your church. Tony Miano has been willing to speak about me. I know for a fact because I heard it with my own ears. And yet, does he lack the spine to come on here and to talk directly to me? I flew across the country for reconciliation, but he won't even pick up a phone.
Yeah, they do the same thing with me. In the private video, I'm the chief reviler and slanderer, and I've had conversations with other people that have left long after we left, and they talk about you all the time. And like, I'm sure they do, and that doesn't offend me in the least bit, because I know I have been the leading voice in making noise about them. It's been effective to some degree, because I know it's caused trouble for them in certain ministries that they were doing in Africa. I know it's caused some trouble at G3. I know it's caused trouble with other areas. One thing that we have done that is, if we see comments about the church on Google reviews or whatever, my wife has contacted some of those people, and we've had a lot of conversations with people that stopped going or took their comments down because they have no idea what they're talking about. They went one time and were love bombed, and they think it's the world's greatest place. So, we haven't been shy about our criticism of them. And I think that that's a biblical thing to do.
Well, and Tony thought it was a biblical thing to do as well with others. And, I want to get into some of the we talked about his church loving him and exposing some sin and things like that. But first, let me, I want to stick with this because, he talked about lacking the spine. He also said this in that sermon.
The evil that would abandon the so-called brother in arms, fellow soldier out there on the streets, and abandon him and not say a word to him for 6 years. The fear, I'm sure, for some of getting a little bit of the mud on them. That kind of evil.
So that kind of evil. Well, Tony, it's probably been close to a decade that you haven't reached out to me. Stephen Johnson says it's pretty tough talk to Tony at a parade when he's blocked everyone. And so he talks about it being evil to not talk to him. And yet his response is to block people immediately, to unfriend people. Right. And so I'm just, look, have some consistency. If you're going to call it evil, then recognize the behavior you're calling evil is behavior you do, Tony.
It's and he's been doing it for a long time, and far before I think I know who that was at that parade. Tony's been doing it long before that ever happened. And what I like, if Tony does watch this and he listens to this and he hears me speaking right now, what I would ask Tony is, has it been worth the cost that you've paid to be a part of this great community that you're a part of, that this pastor that loves you so much, that is able to point out sin in your life? Tony, how many friends have you lost that you would have called your best friends? Chuck O'Neill, the first guy to sound the alarm bell. Thank you, Chuck.
Yes.
And how many others? Countless. Can you even begin to count all the friends that you've lost? All the people that loved and respected you? I mean, what in the world? And then now that, not only that, what about the people that have left GFC since you've been there? Okay. One of my very best friends from GFC at the time we were there, they left a few years after we did. And somehow, I don't know how I saw it, found it, or whatever, it was this, maybe an Instagram or Facebook post of Tony and this guy on the street, my dear brother, Joe, his name isn't Joe, doing ministry, sidewalk ministry. A few days later, the guy leaves and boom, that post is gone like that. And I'm betting Tony has never, wait a minute. I'll bet you Tony's never said another word to that guy again. Although when the man's wife drives by him, he yells at her from the street and bullies and intimidates her as she's driving up and down the street. I mean, the hypocrisy. I mean, talk about not being able to see the forest for the trees. Tony, yeah. I mean, are you serious?
Well, you talk about friends lost. Let me do this. So I went to the Wayback Machine. I wish I had gotten the dates on this, but let me share. This is, I should make this larger. This was the folks that had endorsed Tony when he had his website. And so let me shut the banner off so you'll be able to see all the names. So I want you to be able to see that at the current time when he still had endorsements, his endorsements are removed altogether. Okay. The ones that were still on there that we were at the time, the last time, was Todd Friel, Cy Ten Bruggencate, Jeff Kirkland, George Lawson. We were told had asked for his name to be removed, and same with Martha Mack, Emilio Ramos. I don't know if the others asked for them to be removed. I know the page is down, But before we started doing the episodes, 10 people had asked to be removed from Tony's endorsements. People who endorsed Tony that removed their endorsements, much of it because he had gone to GFC and views. He had a couple of them are his views with women preaching, but Phil Johnson, Ray Comfort, Emil Zwane, Mike Andrews, Paul Yatchett, I don't know how, I'm probably not pronouncing it right. Bill Adams. Now that's an important one because Tony's ministry was under Bill when he started. So you have Phil Johnson, his pastor, removing, this is before we even did the episode. So you can't blame us. Phil Johnson, his previous pastor at, he was under over there at Grace Community Church. Ray Comfort and EZ, the guys he worked for at Living Waters for years. Bill Adams, the guy that he had, who had, his ministry was under him. Grant Horner, Mark Spence, again, someone from Living Waters that he worked with for years, and then David Tomlin. So I don't know, it is kind of interesting. I don't see Chuck O'Neill's name on here. So I know Chuck is watching, so I'll throw this out to Chuck. Did you ever endorse him and it just never got on there, or what? Because I'm surprised that Chuck would not have written an endorsement to him. So let's see. Chuck says, I just see him putting something up. He said, he says, Martha Mack graciously and biblically addressed Tony and exhorted him to leave GFC's cultic ministry. Tony didn't engage at all, just blocked.
Yeah. That's the pattern, isn't it?
Chuck O'Neill said, Phil Johnson has called Mike Reed's ministry cultic and morally dangerous. Actually, I don't have the quote up, but I actually have had a quote that Phil Johnson sent when Anthony started doing this. So, all right, let's move on to some of these others. This is where he talks about nomads, because what we're going to start getting into is this pattern that Kevin, you referred to. Tony talks about how he came to GFC. And as you hear that, we already heard it, this is a pattern he has with every church. Tony has had a pattern when he left the first church that I don't know the name of it. It was when I first met him, he was attending there, and then he went to Faith Community Church. When he went to Faith Community Church, he said the same things. He left the church. The other church wasn't really doing evangelism. This church was going to let him do the evangelism. They exposed, there were some things that it was a great community. There was sin in his life exposed, and he really felt community there. They end up, there's going to be some question with this. They end up, basically they vote him in as an evangelist of the church. We're going to hear later in some clips where he kind of denies some of that a bit. But I have clips where he says that. So, and so they make him an evangelist. He then leaves that church because they weren't comfortable with his open air preaching. And yet then he goes to Grace Community Church, and there he felt the real community, the holiness. He leaves there, goes to GFC, and it's the same story. It's the same thing 4 times over. And I mean, if you listen, a couple people listened to the full sermon, and people commented about how it's all playing the victim card. There is a lot of that you hear throughout his testimony. But here's what he talks about the nomads. Now, when he speaks of nomads, I'm just going to say these were a group of people. It includes Mark Cahill. In fact, I'll just say publicly, I've never said this before publicly, but the reason that I refuse to go out and speak every single week or even most weeks, we have as a ministry, none of our speakers can be out of their local church for more than half the year. Why? Because when I met Mark Cahill, I remember asking him, what church are you a member of? He goes, whatever one I'm at that week to preach at. He had no church. And there were a lot of the sinless perfectionist guys. They had no church, and they were going around just, there was, I remember, a guy like Jeff Rose, who started now he started a church network, But when he was in Jersey, he left a sound church, and he was just on the streets in Camden, New Jersey, and he was calling it church, doing open air. And he called it church. That's not church. Now, I don't think Tony had, Jeff Rose in mind with this, but at the time, because he was kind of working with Jeff Rose at the time. But when he talks about nomads, that's what he's talking about. The way he uses it in this sermon, though, is not the same thing. He's using the term nomads now to refer to people that are in churches.
Yeah.
And are under their church's authority. So, I mean, just give a listen.
Part of that good was to remove me in many ways from this so-called community of open air preaching. A band of nomads who may or may not have some tacit connection to the local church or no connection at all. God has set me free from so much.
Amen.
And he's used these last 6 years under the love and care and shepherding of my pastors and my church family to show me sin in my own life. Show me how much I sin.
So remember, I mean, Kevin, he's referring, well, to his old church, the people he went out with. Remember, he's saying that that Grace Community, Grace Fellowship Church got him out of these nomads that he was with before. Who was he with before? Grace Community Church. That's who he was doing outreach with before. So when we hear him say this, let's play him in his own words. Here he is. This was an important announcement that he had back in 2014. February 24th of 2014, an important announcement that he and his family, he says, when he and his family began attending Faith Community Church on September 11th of 2011, we knew after the first Sunday, we had found a new church home. In a month's time, the 5 of us completed the membership process and were recognized and affirmed as members. So this was when he left the church, the first church that I had known he was attending. I don't know that name. This is the one before Grace Community Church. He says here, I immediately began serving the church as the Lord presented opportunities. I served the church security team, assisted with the church's outreach events. So he got involved in Awana, did all these things. He says here, okay, about 18 months ago, I began the process with my elders, the goal in which was to have my elders commission me through the laying on of hands to serve Faith Community Church as an evangelist, in keeping with the role of an evangelist delineated in Ephesians 4:11-14. The process includes meeting with the elders, a close examination of my present ministry as an evangelist, and equally closely examination of my character and gifting, and the writing and rewriting my ministry proposal. The process also included an examination of my financial accountability and ministry-related funds, which in part resulted in Cross Encounters Ministry receiving an ECFA accreditation under the umbrella of Revival USA. Revival USA is the ministry that does the sports fan outreach, and that is Bill Adams. So you see, there was a lot of accountability in his life, in this church, is what he's saying. This is why he liked it so much, and they eventually make him an evangelist. He says here, I benefited greatly from this process with my elders, and learned how seriously, thoughtful, and prayerfully my elders make important decisions. I mean, does this sound familiar to what we heard in this sermon? The elders extended to me a great deal of love, patience, grace, and friendship, including the process with one of the elders taking time personally helped me to rewrite my ministry proposal. The elders were also very helpful by pointing out areas of my life and ministry that needed maturing. They were always very quick to encourage, quick to listen, and never afraid to offer their collective and individual wisdom, discernment, and when warranted, correction. So we end up seeing that. Right? Okay. So we see that pattern. The same thing we heard with GFC. Then he says, the process drew to a close in December of 2013. In the end of my elders affirmed they believed that God's call in my life was to serve him as an evangelist. At the same time, they found aspects of my life, of my evangelistic gifting and ministry, namely open air preaching, philosophically incompatible with the evangelistic direction of the elders have set forth for Faith Community Church family. That being the case, the elders determined that they could not lay hands on me in the commission of Faith Community Church as an evangelist. Then he talks about how he went from there to Grace Community Church. Now, I want you to note something in this article that he's writing after he has left Faith Community Church. He claims they never laid hands on him as an evangelist. We'll have audio evidence to the contrary from Jersey Fire, where he said the opposite, where he said that they did lay hands. I didn't do the time. There is probably an article where I know there was an article where he wrote about it, and he said that they laid hands on him. So if anyone wants, go back. It's going to be between the time frame of 2011 and 2023, those years that he did that. Okay, he comes to Grace Community Church, and basically and I'll put for the audio podcast, I'll put the links in the audio podcast. But if for folks that don't know, you could Apologetics Live is an audio podcast you can follow and get it every week downloaded to you. But he basically is going to say the same things here. You know, how he goes to Grace Community Church and he had meetings with two of the pastors here. If you see this line, during which they discussed the life and ministry and these things, and under the leadership, and after counseling with his wife and his daughters and prayer, they came to come to Grace Community Church. Okay, so it's a similar thing that we end up seeing, and I'm belaboring this to say, when he makes these claims, it's nothing new.
Mm-hmm.
It's just, there's nothing new there.
Yeah.
Kevin, you have thoughts on that?
Well, yeah, man. I mean, what I find fascinating, and we hear it in these audio clips, he talks so much about this sin in his life, and he says it in those articles, all this sin in his life that's being pointed out. I got sin in my life. I'm sure you got sin in your life, Andrew. I don't dwell on it. Like, am I saved or not? Well, if I'm saved, my sin is forgiven, right? Past, future, present, everything is covered. It is finished. And this is a tactic of Grace Fellowship Church. Like I talked about earlier, about they got to unsave you so they can resave you. The focus on sin and holiness and beating that drum nonstop, it leaves a person with a severe lack of assurance of their salvation. It leaves it a joyless society. It leaves you constantly navel gazing, examining your life. I mean, again, I sin. I am a sinner. I will continue to sin, but simultaneously, I'm a saint. I've been forgiven. I repent of my sins when I know about them. But I don't spend this massive amount of time being focused on my sin. Our church here in Albuquerque, they preach about sin, but they don't beat you over the head about your sin day in and day out. And that was the destructive tendencies. And now you factor in this shepherding movement, the close shepherding. And even in that sermon, he talks about the close shepherding that he has always desired. It's just like you not only need the Holy Spirit and you need the common or ordinary means of grace, you also need Mike Reed to be on your shoulder, telling you where you're wrong and what you're doing wrong, and constantly berating you on your sin. Man, just like, this is taking my mind back to all these things. And it's it's triggering. It really is.
Well, I mean, I'm going to put this one up. Stephen Johnson says, how can you leave John MacArthur's church to move to Iowa and join Mike Reed's, who is scary and the leader of an abusive cult? You can't make this stuff up. But, Kofi says something that I want to address and more to the point. Kofi from Deep Dive Discipleship, which was a great podcast when he was doing it. Kofi, why don't you continue? All right, I'll get off that soapbox. I missed that podcast. Kofi says, the irony of calling out nomads when you bounce from church to church looking for someone to recognize you, that's not healthy. And honestly, that seems to be a thing in some street preaching circles. And that is one of the issues that I have real concern with. And I'm going to play clips of Tony, or a clip of Tony. The fact is, you saw that he said he left Faith, I forgot the name of the church now.
Faith Community or Faith Bible Church or something like that.
Community, to go to Grace Community Church because they didn't accept his style of evangelism.
Mm-hmm.
And then he's going out to this church now where he can do his style of evangelism. He was doing open air preaching before at Grace Community Church. He was I think he was even leading some teams. But he will say later, well, play the clip where he says you shouldn't leave for those reasons. You should never leave for those reasons. But here's he's going to talk about, and you talked about his sin. Let me just play the opening. And folks, first off, if you're not following Your Calvinist podcast, I encourage you. Keith Foskey, we actually follow the podcast, but also follow the YouTube channel because he puts stuff on YouTube he doesn't do on that he doesn't put onto the podcast. But this is the beginning of his interview with Tony, and you can hear the whole thing where Tony talks about stuff. But let's just play this beginning.
I thought I was never going to be able to open air preach again. It was not only my ministry, but it was the way I supported my family as well. And I panicked. I went. I mean, it was.
Yep. And that's why you should download them. Almost. So we don't have commercials. All right. I'm just going to stop that because I don't want to play someone's commercial. So, but yeah, so he panicked. He talks about the sin where he panicked. He was on prescription drugs for anxiety. He had, I guess it was Mike Reed that got him off of that. And that is a good thing. Okay. It seemed he went on them or went off them, went on them or off them. It is kind of, I will say this one thing. The one issue I have with that clip he started out saying he was afraid for his ministry. The thing I find interesting with it is, let me just give you some, what got me with Tony, for people that supported Tony would regularly, at the end of the month, you could expect to see a message when Tony was still in California going, hey, I need, like $1,500 for basic living. Mm-hmm. Now, after his wife was done homeschooling the girls, she went out and got a job. The wife was the earner of the family. Tony's ministry was doing some evangelism and begging people online for money. That's why I didn't donate to him. Okay. So when he talks about a fear of his, this is his livelihood. It was his wife who was his livelihood. His wife was the one who earned the money. She was the one that went out to work. So it's like, but it's just, he's going to say these are his sins. So he was on, and this is what I guess his latest book is about. And so he wants us to learn from his mistakes. He's going to say that in this clip.
Now, considering the topic I have been assigned, the evangelist's responsibility to the church, topic I've addressed many times in different formats, I thought the best service I could bring to you today, if you see yourself as an evangelist, is to consider almost 2 decades of mistakes that I've made and encourage you. I want to help you with love for you, with love for those who have reviled me and my church and my family. I want to help you avoid telling yourself and others
the lies I told myself and others for years.
So this is the reason I play that clip is because this is the same thing he said with why he came to, his church before Grace Community Church, why he came to Grace Community Church. It's the same pattern over and over again. Phil is asking this question. He says, "Is Keith Foskey still supports Tony?"
Good question.
So I don't know if he ever supported him financially, but he supports. He at least supported him enough to write an endorsement on the book, have him on the podcast. So I talked to him just to say, are you aware of any of the issues with his church? And he basically said he doesn't have time. He knows that there's some strange things he's heard. And that's what everyone says. It's just weird. He heard some weird things, but people want to separate that from Tony because they love Tony, and I get that.
Can I just want to say something about that because I think this is a good time to interject it. One of the things Tony does is he calls us wolves and he calls us cowards. I've written an article or two on the topic of wolves. What is a wolf? We have two primary texts in the New Testament that deal with wolves, which is Acts 20, where Paul is exhorting the Ephesian elders that after my departure, savage wolves will come in, not sparing the flock, and they'll rise up from within your own ranks, right? The other primary text is Matthew 7, where Jesus says, "Beware of false prophets. Inwardly, they are wolves dressed in sheep's clothing, and you will recognize them by their fruits." Okay, so when we're called wolves, first of all, we don't really meet that biblical definition of not being like the pastor of a church, which is what Paul is talking about. But if you want to make an application that we've done damage to them, they might consider that being a wolf. But what a wolf actually is a person who's a teacher or a pastor in a church that is doing damage to the flock of God. And if Mike Reed doesn't fit that definition of a wolf, I don't know who on God's green earth does, because we lined up a cloud of witnesses on this program alone talking about the damage that they've done. There's at least 100 that I tried to put a name to on a piece of paper of the people that have left and been damaged in one way, shape, or form or another. Mike has scattered the flock. He's done spiritual, irreparable harm to countless many people. And he is a total biblical definition of what a wolf is. And so Tony can refer to me and you and Anthony or whoever he wants to as a wolf, but the reality is that his pastor is the one who fits that definition.
Yeah. And I mean, look, I think guys like Keith Foskey, myself, before Anthony started this, I just said, okay, having people kiss on the lips, weird, not my thing. Meeting with women alone on a regular basis, not advisable. But I wasn't willing to say they were a cult. I wasn't willing to say they were, that the church was bad. Why? Because, me, like many others, just didn't have time to investigate it.
Right.
It was only because you and Anthony came on this show, and because it's my show, I was, either watching, the weeks I couldn't be there, or I was here and realized, wow, there's a lot here. This is really bad.
Yeah.
And and I think it was the episode when we had all those 6 or 7 people come in and one after another talking about the controlling behavior, that I realized, no, this is a cult. And I ended up, kind of apologizing to Anthony there because he was right and I was wrong. I said, hey, well, I wasn't, not that I was wrong. I just said, you got to be careful calling it a cult unless it really fits the definition. But
you didn't have a full-orbed understanding at that time. And I'm so thankful for Anthony and I mean, the 100 hours or so, or whatever he put in to examine this. That's unbelievable that he would do that. And I'm so thankful for it, that it was able to expose something and bring it to light. Now, hey, repent and go back and clean up your mess, Mike. I wish you would do that.
Yeah.
I don't know whether you're right with God. I'm not in the business of telling people whether they're saved or not. He is, but I'm not. I mean, we will examine people by their fruit. And if we examine Mike's fruit, he appears to me to fit the definition that Jesus gave of a false prophet.
Yeah. I mean, so this is, and we're going to go a little bit longer tonight, just so we can get through this. But let me play this clip, because we're going to get into where he talks about the importance of church for an evangelist.
So allow me to cut to the chase. If you are not a churchman, you are not an evangelist in any biblical sense of the term. If you are not a churchman, you are not doing the work of an evangelist. You might be engaged in evangelism, but you are not an evangelist. You have a responsibility to the local church. If you are not called and sent out by the local church, if you are not serving the local church, then you are not an evangelist. Here I stand.
Okay. So there he stands. Now, he says, he went to GFC because there he got that he was under their authority. That was the whole thing, right? He's under their authority.
Yeah.
And that's when, this is as if this is the first time he was under the authority of a church when he was doing open air. And so let me just play something else. And I didn't send this to you, Kevin, but let me just play this. This was done by Marcus Pittman many, many years ago, 12 years ago, that he put this together. Tony Miano, a profile, open air preacher profile of Tony Miano. All right. Where he says every evangelist should belong to a church. Listen how he begins his open air. And this is how he always he'd start his open air. Yeah. Listen.
Good afternoon, folks.
Oh.
Good afternoon, folks. My name is Tony Miano. I'm a member of Faith Community Church, and I have the prayerful support of my elders and my pastors. And again, I'm here today to declare to you the Son of the living God, the Christ.
My name's Tony Miano, and I'm an evangelist. I am a member of a church. I am under the biblical authority of pastors and elders. And I'm not, even if I'm standing on a box all by myself, I'm not out here alone. I have the coverage of my church family. More and more, I am seeing men and women out on the streets under the auspices of being evangelists for the Lord Jesus Christ, who are out there as nomads. They're not under the authority of any local church. They do not submit themselves to the authority of pastors or elders. They are not held accountable by older, more mature men in the faith.
I see so many street preachers, and I applaud the fact that God seems to be raising up street preachers. But some of them, I wish they would quit and work at Lowe's or Home Depot. They're just angry people who want to hurt other people and call them names and film themselves while they're doing it so they can put it on YouTube. How I would give to just walk around a corner and see a street preacher who was just telling people about how glorious Christ is.
The Lord, the Messiah, God Almighty, Lion of the tribe of Judah, who once came as a baby, humble in a stable, but when he returns, my friend, he will not return as a meek and mild lamb to be punished by his creation. No, he will return as the Lion of the tribe of Judah to judge both the living and the dead. God is holy, God is righteous, God is just, God is good, and God will punish sin. But God is also, not instead of, he is also loving, merciful, gracious, and kind. And he provided one way, and only one way for you to escape the just and holy wrath of Almighty God. My friends, Muhammad cannot save you. Muhammad is dead. Buddha is dead. Jesus Christ alone is God. Jesus Christ is risen. Jesus Christ is alive. My friends and I worship a living God. We worship a living Savior. And the only God who can save you is the only God who is alive, and that is Jesus Christ the Lord.
When people think of the street preacher, they think of someone who is very angry. They're yelling and screaming at people. They're calling people names. There's no grace. There's no love. And more often than not, there's no gospel. And sadly, there is that kind of street preaching. More often than not, it's by heretics, the groups of people that I refer to as nomads. They're out on the streets, basically a law unto themselves. And sadly, I'm seeing more and more of these groups turn to heresies of long ago, full-on Pelagianism, denying the imputed righteousness of Christ, denying original sin, believing in sinless perfectionism. And more often than not, these men and women are out on the streets, not bringing the good news of Jesus Christ, but only bringing the condemnation of God's law.
My friends, I am going to heaven not because I'm good, not because I'm standing on a box holding a Bible, not because I go to church, not because I'm less sinful than the next person. I'm going to heaven entirely on the basis of what Jesus Christ did on the cross. It is Jesus Christ and Jesus Christ alone. There is no name given among men under heaven by which we must be saved. And it is Jesus Christ the Lord.
So I wanted to play that full clip because I it was some good preaching there. And Chuck says, excellent compare and contrast, Andrew, exposing Tony's deception with his own words. That's what we're trying to do here. Sorry, let's see. Oh, Stephen says, funny how he was a nomad at the same time he's railing against nomads. Well, he was a member of a church, but I wanted that clip just for the sake of, I want you to see the consistent pattern when he says he came to GFC and everything was different, right? No. I mean, we're focusing on Tony because Tony is the one that preached this sermon that we had, and he wanted us to hear it. He said, we actually, I think we heard it. We finally found it like a year after he preached it, but
he's probably shocked. It's 2.5 years later that we're finally doing something about it.
And the only reason we are is because he's still playing the same victim status. Oh, woe is me. But this church is so good. It saved me. It didn't save me, but saved him from his drug addiction. So as we look at it, I mean, it's just I had the clip of his resume, but that's like 45 seconds 2 minutes and 45 seconds of him just giving all the things he's done. Let me play this clip where he talks about pastors and support, because this is where I now want to get into, not from that sermon, but from the sermon that he gave at our event, Jersey Fire. Because here you see he was an evangelist of the church. Now, in that blog article, he said that they never laid hands on him. And because of that is why he went to Grace Community Church. However, they did lay hands on him. He was an evangelist. And they did all this investigation, but he said that they didn't like the open air. But they knew he did open air. But let's give a listen.
But while it took my pastor a while to get on board, my pastor never discouraged me from hitting the streets. And now my pastor is one of my biggest advocates, one of the biggest advocates I know as far as pastors regarding biblical evangelism. He exhorts our church on a regular basis to step out of their comfort zone and to reach the lost with the gospel. And he faithfully proclaims the law and the gospel from his pulpit. And not long ago, the elders of our church laid hands on me and called me to the office of evangelist in our church, which is something that a lot of churches don't do. So I am in a very good place.
Did you hear his own words? I could bring the article up again here, and we could read his own words and see if they agree. In his blog article after he left, and remember that sermon that is from Jersey Fire is before he was at Grace Community Church. He was at this church, Faith Community Church, where he says in this article, they did not lay hands on him, if I can find it. But on that, as you heard him say, at the time that he preached it, they had laid hands on him and they knew he did open air they endorsed the open air. And his pastor not only fully knew it, was encouraging him all along, right? So it says here that his pastors didn't ask him to stop. I want you to I'm going to replay that clip. But this is the paragraph I want you to look at that I highlighted. The elders assured me that they would not ask me to stop open air preaching. They assured me that my family and I were welcome to continue to be members of the church, of Faith Community Church, for the rest of our lives. They repeatedly reassured their love and care for and support for the of the Miano family. However, the elders collectively determined the best thing for me and my ministry, to which they affirmed God had called me to do, would be to find another church where the elders and I would be in a same philosophical, on the same page, right? So why did they do that? Well, because of the fact that, he had said previously they didn't lay hands on him.
It's the sentence right above your highlighted one.
Yeah.
And that being the case, it says the elders determined they could not lay hands on me.
So now I want to replay this clip with the question that I have for you as I replay it. Does this sound like, while he was at Faith Community Church, does it sound like he didn't, that he was the nomad he said he was? Does it sound like he was someone who I'll bring up the words that he has said throughout at different times. He said it in that sermon at one point. He said he had his own, he says, this is a quote from him. It was my ideas, my desires. I went wherever I wanted to go. I did whatever I wanted to do, unquote. And elsewhere he had said this, quote, I answered to no one, not in any real appreciative way. So I formed an, quote, advisory board, unquote, groups of well-intentioned Christian men who had no real actual authority over my life or over the ministries they advised. I had to make it at least look like I had some accountability. These men were not yes men. Most of them were pastors/elders, but they weren't my pastors/elders. They could give me advice, but they could simply take it, but I could simply take it or leave it, unquote. Now, that's a quote that he says when he comes to why he came to GFC. He came there because he was going to get all this accountability. I know Chuck O'Neill was on his board, his accountability board. I think Phil Johnson is or was. I mean, Chuck, you could put it in the chat and we could see if that's true. I thought he was, and Phil Johnson was his pastor at the time, but Chuck O'Neill has testified on previous episodes here that he did give counsel and advice to Tony, and he was the one that just decided to leave it. So if there was no accountability, it wasn't the accountabilities board. They did try to speak into his life, but I want to play that clip again. And you tell me after hearing this clip, if it sounds like Tony's saying he did have accountability in his life. He was laid hands on as an evangelist in the church of Faith Community Church prior to Grace Community Church. Let's listen again.
But while it took my pastor a while to get on board, my pastor never discouraged me from hitting the streets. And now my pastor is one of my biggest advocates, one of the biggest advocates I know as far as pastors regarding biblical evangelism. He exhorts our church on a regular basis to step out of their comfort zone and to reach the lost with the gospel. And he faithfully proclaims the law and the gospel from his pulpit. And not long ago, the elders of our church laid hands on me and called me to the office of evangelist in our church, which is something that a lot of churches don't do. So I am in a very good place.
He is in a very good place. The same thing he said when he went to Grace Community Church, the same thing he said when he went to GFC. It's a regular pattern. Chuck said this. He said, Tony met with Phil regularly for accountability. Both Phil and I exhorted Tony not to subject his family to the ministry beneath Mike Reed. And so Phil was his pastor at the time. Phil had said that he encouraged Tony to go out there and check it out. But then after finding out more about Mike Reed, he told Tony not to go, but Tony had already made the decision. Kevin, does it sound like from that clip that he did at our event at Jersey Fire, does it sound like he was unaccountable? That he was just doing his own thing? He was a nomad, as he said he was before he went to GFC?
I mean, it doesn't take a lot of discernment to hear that, the language is similar, that he is very proud of the fact that he's got pastors that are accountable to him, hold him accountable, that, it's the same language that he's heard. Now, I'm sure it's off the charts accountability at GFC. It'll be a higher level of that. And what he appears to be pushing for in that 2022 sermon is the fact that every open air preacher needs that level of accountability. You can't just be in a church. The pastors are okay with you going out and open air preaching. No, you can't. They have to be beating you up every week in order for it to be good shepherding, apparently, from what Tony's perspective is now.
Yeah. So the question is, what was he in a good church? Well, let's hear him in his own words.
But back to club frustration. Misery truly loves company. And I found that the more time I spent on the streets, the more time I spent with other Christians whose frustration I shared, the less time I spent with my church family. And over time, I found it easy to justify the mindset because of the eternal importance of reaching the lost with the gospel. No one's going to argue with that. At least no Christian should. And I began to see my fellowship with other evangelists on the streets as, in some ways, a substitute for my fellowship with my brothers and sisters in Christ in my church. Before long, I was leading a team of evangelists, and the work of evangelism became all-consuming, and I was becoming a nomad. Some of us talked about forming our own church, one that would emphasize biblical evangelism in ways that other churches don't. And we would grow the church from those who we saw receive Christ from our street evangelism efforts. We were going to reinvent the wheel in Southern California, and we were going to show other churches how it's done. Well, fortunately, by God's grace, all of us realized that we were either already in God-glorifying, Christ-centered churches, or there were such churches nearby we could
attend. I cut it off too soon. So what you end up hearing from there is he acknowledges, this is when he's at Faith Community Church. He said that prior, he was struggling with, I guess, whatever church he came to faith from, where he was struggling. But does that sound familiar to what he said? I mean, like why he came to GFC? It's
Exactly.
the same.
Yeah. And I think it's the same with Grace Community Church. I mean, he clearly said that in that article that he wrote. And I remember kind of hearing about that. I didn't know Tony then, but him going there, and maybe he was going to be, going to the master's seminary. I don't remember all the stuff that he was doing, but he might've been in a Bible study, leading a Bible study, but he was fully plugged in, but that's nothing like what he experiences now, according to him.
See, and that's the whole thing is that's why I'm trying to, and we only have about 3 more clips. They're short. But it's like, why beat the dead horse? Well, because I want you to see that this is nothing new with him. So when he goes out and he writes a book saying he's had these struggles, and this is why this church it made such a difference. He said that with every church he's gone to. Right?
I hope he'll do it one more time.
Yeah. But this time, he actually would be leaving a bad church. So here's Tony talking about, was Tony a novice?
Those who fall prey to the lure of nomadism are often young men who, by outward appearances, seem to grow very quickly in their faith. They devour scripture. They're voracious readers and students. They often show great promise and seemingly leave older Christians in the dust when it comes to their ability to retain information and when it comes to their zeal and ability to serve, to preach, and to teach. But before long, the pride and arrogance of the old creature begins to affect the growth of the new creature.
They begin to see themselves as better equipped and more gifted than the older men around them. And that may very well be true. But when the novice starts to think about such things, even dwell on such things, they sometimes begin to brood about being held back by other leaders, older leaders. In their mind, they're not being given leadership responsibility fast enough. And eventually the frustration can lead to the novice setting out on his own with all too often a few burnt bridges left behind. I did that. Many, many years ago, I did that to a church because I was a novice who was put in leadership too soon.
Okay, so the church he's referring to is the one before Faith Community Church, right? And so he's saying that he left Faith, the one before Faith Community Church, and came to Faith Community Church. He was a novice before. He caused this problem, right? So what we see is he left. It seems he left the church before Faith Community Church, comes to Faith Community Church because of the issue of evangelism. He leaves Faith Community Church to go to Grace Community Church, the issue being evangelism, specifically the open air. He leaves Grace Community Church, and as we played earlier, he comes to GFC saying that, he, again, claiming he was a novice, he did what he wanted, he had no accountability, even though in each of these churches, when he gets to new one, he says he's got all this great accountability. I want to play the clip of what he says about a reason for leaving the church, because I'm going to ask you, he said he left the church, and specifically, in his own words, he wrote, he left because of the open air evangelism. They would not make him an evangelist. They would not endorse his open air evangelism, which you take those words in writing and you take his own sermon while he was still at the church. I don't know how else to reconcile it, but there's no third option I could think of as the church did not lay hands on him or the church did lay hands on him. There is no third option. So one of those has to be false. And since he was publicly stating at the time that he was ordained as an evangelist and they knew about his open air ministry, I find it hard to believe that the later one where he's explaining why he came to Grace Community Church was because they didn't lay hands on him and they didn't approve of it. Because you heard him say they did approve of it. They did lay hands on him. And so, I think it's more he's twisting things to explain why he went to Grace Community Church. But even so, it's about the evangelism. Should we leave a church because of their evangelism? Let's ask Tony.
Well, there's no way I can anticipate all the arguments against the position I put forward. I can anticipate at least a couple of them. One is this: I'm not part of a church because I can't find a church that supports or practices biblical evangelism. Maybe that's some of you here. And again, if your church is not preaching the biblical gospel, then it's not a church. It's nothing more than a social club for professing Christians, both genuine and professing. And if your church is not preaching the gospel, you are obligated, because of your love for Christ, to leave. You're obligated to leave. If you're in a church where the gospel is not being preached, you are practicing idolatry because you're hearing something other than the gospel. And you're affirming and supporting that false gospel by staying. You have to leave. However, if your church is preaching the biblical gospel, then the fact that your church does not presently support biblical evangelism in the manner you prefer is not a sufficient or biblical reason to leave the church. It's not.
And Tony admits to leaving two churches for that reason.
I've got some interesting thoughts regarding all of this because, one, when we left, Tony wanted to meet with me. We met. I spent probably a couple hours with him. Could have been an hour and a half, might have been 2 hours. I don't remember. Might have even been longer. But one of the things that he really stressed to me is that he had left churches the wrong way, and he didn't want to see me do that. And one of, well, how did you leave Grace Community Church to come to GFC? It didn't fall under the parameter of Mike Reed's standards, being sent, mutual consent, sending, death, or excommunication. He didn't, that wasn't, he just left. He just decided, this is where I'm going to go now. So he made the decision all on his own. But I find it incredibly interesting that he said, if they're not preaching a biblical gospel, you absolutely should leave. So our contention, and it wasn't as clear at the time that we left GFC, but it's very clear now, is they're not preaching the biblical gospel. They're preaching, now people there know it to some degree, but the emphasis is on the law. It's flat out legalism in its many different forms, and it's a performance-based society based upon how they view your sanctification. That's how you're judged in the church, is what's your level of sanctification. And that's why Mike maintains control over people by examining their sin all the time. And that's why he's probably got his hooks into Tony in one way or another about some kind of sin in his life that he needs old Pastor Mike to keep him on the straight and narrow.
And I mean, I'm hesitant just because some of your comments are judging motives. I understand you have lots of history and know, so we want to be cautious with it though, right? But you have a lot of history that you've seen, so you've seen a pattern over and over again.
Yes.
And that's what you're really addressing is that pattern.
Yes. Yeah, it's personal experience, and I think if you polled everybody that's been on this show that is a GFC survivor, they would affirm 100% what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Now, we can call it opinion, we can call it, and they'll probably say, you're this and that and whatever, but that is my experience. That is what we determined, especially later on, why it was such a drudgery of a place to be.
So let me just put this up. We're talking about accountability, and then we have one more clip that we'll have. This is from his website, okay, about accountability. And so he says, Tony is a member in good standing of Grace Fellowship Church, Davenport, Iowa. Grace Encounters Ministry is overseen by the elders of Grace Fellowship Church, Mike Reed, Nick Rowland, and Tyler Balkema. These men are actively and regularly engaged in shepherding Tony, providing counsel, overseeing in his local ministry, his travel schedules, monitoring his social media presence, reviewing his blog articles, digital recordings, and video prior to posting, and participating with him in various forms of street evangelism. Now, I just put that up to show you this is what he has said every time.
Mm-hmm.
There's nothing new there. So what was different with this accountability that he didn't have before? I mean, because if he thought he had the accountability before and it was rock solid, but now he realizes it wasn't, could he realize that the rock solid counseling he's getting from Mike Reed is not so rock solid?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Like the heart is deceitful and desperately wicked. Who can understand it? Can we actually understand our own hearts and what we're sometimes being exposed to, and where we thought that this was really good and then we learn later on that it wasn't? I mean, is that what Tony would say? Oh, I never realized, I thought it was good at the time, but looking back on it now, compared to what I have now, that was terrible. I mean, those guys weren't accountable to me. These guys watch all my videos. They, I have breakfast with Pastor Mike every Wednesday, and he beats me up, and, we're all good, and I know that program. I mean, I wrote about it in one of the articles regarding the shepherding movement of the 1970s. I mean, it's, even the guys that started that movement came to realize how damaging it is. I mean, Mike has to know your business. He has to be intimately and closely involved in your life. And apparently Tony was was looking for that.
Yeah. Well, Tony always has that kind of relationship. Tony always, like I said, he puts himself under someone else. That's who Tony is. The thing that really shocked me when you're talking about the controlling of GFC was the one woman who said that because she wasn't married, Mike had said that he was, and she didn't have a father, that he was her spiritual father. So her paycheck went into a bank account that he controlled.
They monitor it all, and they set up budgets, and they help them control their money. And I mean,
well, they say it's your money, but here this woman wants to spend her own money on new furniture, and he didn't think it appropriate. And she had said she realized that when she left the church, she was going to have to lose all her savings because he had control. She couldn't get her own money that she worked for. That's controlling, and that's what a cult does. But let me ask you, Kevin, would it be nice if Tony talked to us back long before GFC days, if he told us, warned us about cults?
Yeah, it would be good to know what cults are like, wouldn't it?
Yeah,
for people.
This is again back in Jersey Fire. So this is back. He was probably thinking Church of Wells because that's what we were dealing with at the time. Let's hear.
And if the drift continues unabated, the nomad may begin to deny essential Christian doctrines. And we've seen this. We've seen this from men who once faithfully proclaimed the one true gospel, but now they are denying doctrines like the penal substitutionary atonement of Christ or the imputed righteousness of the Lord Jesus Christ. Evangelists that take this unfortunate and unbiblical step toward nomadism run the risk of becoming isolationists. The kind of isolationism may also lead the nomad to wrongly judge other Christians and assign other Christians to hell because they don't believe exactly as the nomad believes regarding certain points of doctrine. And if such behavior remains unchecked, this could lead to the formation of cults, like personality cults, or what I call "we're the only true church" cult. Cults such as these are typically led by one or more charismatic leaders who convince their followers that they alone rightly divide, understand, and communicate the word of God. And every other teacher is therefore in their mind a false teacher.
Now, remember 2 hours ago I said this was going to come up, one of those questions. Did Mike Reed say they were the only true church in the Quad City areas? And the reason that came up is, and you remember this more than I, but I know it came up on one of the episodes you and Anthony did, that Mike Reed said there were only a handful of true churches, I think in the world. One being the one they're planting in Africa, their church, Grace Community Church, which I think was removed from that list of true churches. So this was long before. I mean, what Tony is referring to is people who are the sinless perfectionists. But I wanted to hear in his own words what he says about churches that claim they're the only true church. He referred to it as a cult.
Yeah.
Now, you didn't know that clip because I don't think I sent that sermon to you. I saw your eyes when you heard that. You went, "Oh." What are your thoughts?
That's exactly what he's involved in. I mean, it just fits it to a T. I mean, those are the things. I mean, there's a distortion of the gospel. It's a law gospel distinction that is weighted toward the law and not the gospel. They crush people's joy in their salvation. They crush their security in their salvation. They pound home sin. They talk about authority as if it's all we know. It's all we know to talk about. Sin, authority, submission. It's constant. All these things, and they are the authority of the church. They, I don't know. They certainly wouldn't say it today because enough of this has been exposed. But they've said it, and they surely believe it, that they are the only game in town. That they're the only ones that truly know the gospel, that they're the only ones that are doing it right. It's just like that clip. Oh man, that is amazing. And if could Tony hear it now? Could he receive it? Could he understand that he's in that he is part of that, what he spoke against? I mean, that's good preaching. That is good preaching,
It is. Yeah. Stephen Johnson said, wow, from Mike Reed's mouth, he told me that his church was one of only 5 in the United States that was true.
Yeah. How does he know that? I wonder. Has he been to them all?
So let's go to some of the questions that we had. Before we do, we should give a word to our sponsors that sponsor the show. And then we'll get to, we got about a dozen questions or comments that you guys have brought up. First of our supporters are MyPillow. If you want to get yourself a great night of sleep, I tout their 3-inch mattress topper. I absolutely love that thing. I know it was costly, but it was like getting a brand new bed. I actually had someone that came on my Rap Report podcast, a pastor that I was interviewing, and he actually told me that he and his wife were they were looking to get a new bed, and they're as they got older, they just really needed to get a good firm bed. They chose to go to MyPillow and get the mattress topper for 1/3 of the price of a new bed, and he said it was like getting a brand new bed, and they've had it for many years, and it's still rock solid. So go to mypillow.com, use the promo code SFE to get the discounts there. Help you get up in the morning. I encourage you to go to get some Squirrely Joe's coffee. Go to strivingforeternity.org/coffee. And when you use the promo code SFE, you get 20% off. I've gotten so much of their coffee that my next order is going to be the 5-pound bags, not the small ones, because I'm just going for too much coffee. Very good to get your coffee in. So go to strivingforeternity.org/coffee, and always remember to go there when you reorder, because that way they know we sent you. Use the promo code SFE to get your discount. And the last sponsor we have is Logos Bible Software. If you want to look at what Logos Bible Software has to offer to you, go to logos.com/SFE. SFE stands for Striving for Eternity. Logos.com/SFE. That will get you some great discounts. I think they still give you 5 books from us at Striving for Eternity if you go through that link. So let me go through these. We'll try to get through these quickly, just the ones that I had starred. And I know I missed a ton of them because we have a very active chat. And Drew's not here to catch them all. So D had said early on, I'm wondering how Tony's close friends are doing if they're still defending him.
That is an excellent question. And
It's
I know a couple of them come to mind, but I mean, I think they've, at least one guy I know, he has sort of, I think, I don't talk to him hardly ever. I think he's kind of tried to distance himself, but he won't call him out. I think he wants to keep the friendship, if they want to keep this friendship, they can't say anything about it.
And they know that. I've spoken to like a half dozen people that contacted me, at least half dozen that contacted me, and told me that they knew if they talked to him about his church, they knew they'd lose the friendship, and the friendship was more to them than getting him out of a cult. One of those people actually endorsed his newest book. So the Recognize the Sin told me, like, this is absolutely, he absolutely needs to leave that church. That church is you're right, it's a cult. He absolutely has to leave it, but he endorses the book because the friendship is more. Now, when you get to that point, I'm just going to ask for all the evangelists who are against friendship evangelism. What's this? Friendship sanctification? Like we want to be friends with you rather than help you sanctify? I don't do this because I have any grudges against Tony. I do this because a lot of people asked for an update. We had this. We decided we just, okay, we'll do an update and just lay things out. But we do it because we want Tony to come to repentance. We want Mike Reed to come to repentance and just stop the controlling behavior that this church has.
Stop hurting people and go back to the ones you've hurt and apologize to them and seek their forgiveness. And he shouldn't be a pastor. That's the bottom line. I don't see any hope for that for the future. I think he really needs to repent and he needs to get out of the pulpit because he can't help himself. It's his personality. But he has done so much damage to so many people. And as I've been listening to another popular podcast right now, dealing with spiritual abuse and damages That it just goes so deep, and I don't know how people justify their ministries when they've been hurt that bad and hurt that many people. And then, you have this whole deconstruction of the faith because of this kind of stuff. Man, listen, we're still in the faith. We love the Lord. We love the local church. We believe in it. I'm a seminary student. I love the Word of God. I love Reformed theology, even though I think a lot of people in Reformed theology need some reformation in terms of how they deal with people. But I understand why people deconstruct. They've been destroyed by the church.
Kofi agrees with you. He says the sad things about churches like GFC is that that actual pastoral authority becomes viewed in the same way. Yeah. And that's the problem. So let's do these maybe rapid fire. A bunch of these are Chuck O'Neill, which I was surprised he didn't come in, but let's try to see if we could wrap this up quickly, because I know we're a little over time. This one I was confused with. Jeremy had said, I'm glad Tony is here. I love him and very grateful for his ministry. There are several things I am in agreement with him on. I'm not sure about his church, but people don't submit to a biblical church. I think he was confused when I said that I had a guest backstage. He thought it was Tony and not you. If I gave that impression, I'm sorry. We did invite Tony on, and I said that in the description. We invited Tony on. I prayed that he would come on. I was really hoping that he would. I didn't think he would, but I prayed that he would. I really was asking that God would do something in his heart to come in, so we could dialogue. And I'll just make this. I'm saying this publicly. Tony, I know you're listening, because because the church will probably respond to it in a private video. But listen, you or Mike Reed can give me a call anytime. I will pick up the phone. You won't pick up the phone for me for all these years. It's been over 6 years. I will pick up the phone, unless of course I'm busy, and then I'll call you back. You know my number. Let's talk. I would be happy to talk through this. If there's things that I have said or on any of these episodes that anyone has said that is not accurate, we will correct it.
Yeah.
How did I start the show? Correcting something I got wrong in last week's show. We have a history of doing that here. I will correct the record if there's something. We have 12 questions for Mike Reed. They're simple yes/no questions. They can easily be answered. I would love to get the answers to those questions. All right. So Chuck O'Neill asks these, and I think some of these are not really requiring an answer. I think they're more, I think the question gives the answer. Chuck O'Neill says, does it make you a wolf to say a pastor shouldn't meet alone with women to give explicit sexual counsel? Does it make you a wolf to say no safe or sane pastor puts a teen girl up in front of men and boys of the church and give her porn use and masturbation testimony, and then put it online with her name? So I think I missed. I think some. I think Tony had Chuck had some others of, does it call you a wolf? But I think the answer is no. That's not what a wolf would be. Chuck had said this. He said, Tony met with Phil regularly. Oh, I put this one up already. So we'll go to the last comment that we have is from Stephen Johnson. I listened to Tony rail on about nomads at the Super Bowl outreach in 2012, long before he ended up at Grace Community Church. So yeah, it's been a regular theme of his for a long time. And so, Kevin, I want to let you wrap up. Is there, are there any, since we've done the episodes, is there any other updates that you have with the church? I mean, I know when we talked, you kind of were like me, just kind of staying out of it. I really don't, I'm sure Tony and Mike Reed don't believe this, but I really don't follow much of what they do. We've been asked for years to give an update, to do another show. We said no for years. In fact, I actually told Anthony enough, like no more GFC. And he wanted to do one. I'm like, no. And I said that for years. I guess because he was with his new book, a lot of people start coming to me asking me, and I just reached out to you and said, hey, maybe we should just deal with the sermon that he said that he had preached, and see if there's any updates. So any updates that you can have for the audience?
Yeah, so we've been out of there since February of 2018. So, 15, what is that? It'll be 8 years or something like that coming up in February. So, we don't sit around and obsess about them and talk about them and think about them hardly ever anymore. When things come up, when people reach out and contact me and ask me questions or whatever, I want to do my best to love on them and show them support for understanding their plight or understanding what it's like to be in an abusive church. We've been recently connected with a couple in our church here that has been in authoritarian fundamentalist type churches, and we had dinner with them, and it was very nice. So the Lord has used our experience there to minister to others, and we're very grateful for that opportunity. I don't spend a lot of time thinking about them, but on occasion I'll still write an article about them when something comes up. Probably the most recent thing that I can mention is, I think it's been about a year ago now, is a man there, a friend of mine that was a friend at the time, committed suicide. There was a lot of allegations of sin in his life from them at the funeral sermon they preached about this guy's sin that I thought was just awful. So I wanted to write some articles on that, and so that was like the biggest thing. And I've heard a lot of things, but I can't substantiate anything, so I won't even say it. But I know more about it than I probably should or even want to. But there's that. I know they've added a new elder, and I don't know. I don't pay a lot of attention, but people leave. And when they leave, they usually reach out, and we usually rekindle a friendship if that was the case when we were there, or we certainly talk about what's going on. And, there's a lot of people I know that left when we right at about our time frame. And then there's some people that left afterwards. And I know that they're still going through challenges relating to try to understand what the heck happened to them. It's a form of PTSD because it's spiritual abuse. And so, we're not, this is just my opinion. Okay. I'm not against nouthetic counseling per se, but I think that there's, certified people that are counselors that can offer therapy to people that have suffered under these things is a good thing. And I'm not against secular therapy, especially for people that understand trauma. This is trauma, but I know not everybody agrees with me, and that's okay. You don't have to agree with me. This is my opinion. And so I think I want to see people get help, and I want to see people to understand what a growing issue this is. Okay. It's a huge concern. We're seeing a lot more of it. We've seen, amazing men like Dr. Michael Kruger write a book called The Bully Pulpit on spiritual abuse, where he's a New Testament scholar. Why is he wasting his time writing about a topic like this? Well, he says because he's hearing so much about it. So we want to expose that. Tony calls this what did he call it? A circus or something, a clown or
clown circus.
Yeah, whatever. But a podcast or a blog post. Well, you know what? He does that. Why is it wrong for me to do that? So there's a lot of stuff going on, Andrew, but praise God every day that we're no longer there. We praise God that we're in a good church with good preaching and nice people, and not somebody that's asking me about my sin all the time.
And you've been there for a while. I mean, look, I will admit, it seemed I could be wrong, but this seems like it's as long as Tony's been in a church. So that would normally be a good thing.
Right.
So
it's hard to get out of that place. I can tell you that. We were there 9 years.
Yeah. So folks, be praying for Tony, be praying for Mike Reed. They have a look. The show is open. If you want to confront me publicly, I'm here Thursday nights, 8 to 10 Eastern time. apologeticslive.com. Anyone can come in, ask any questions. If we have a guest, we usually give the first hour to the guest. But look, if they come in, I'm going to give them the time to speak. If they can correct the record, go for it. But that was the struggle I had, was that that first episode, they were blasting Anthony, and Mike Reed was, and saying, like I as the authority of the ministry needed to do something, but he couldn't tell me what Anthony did wrong. Anthony was slandering him and saying, but what did he say that was false? And he wouldn't answer.
Yeah, I want to say that kind of that along that same line, Andrew. I've written a lot of articles, right? There's a lot out there that I have done. I've been on your show a bunch of times. I've been on a couple other shows talking about this topic. If you can show me something that I've written that is false, is not true, I please show me. I have no desire in my being to lie about them. I don't need to lie or embellish the truth, because the truth is stranger than fiction, So again, I stand by every word I've ever said about them, or, that doesn't mean that everything I've said is perfect and it's according to my memory, but I would gladly correct something if it's slanderous. And as we know, slander has to have the intent of knowing that it's wrong behind it, in an attempt to damage somebody. I've never done that to them.
Yeah. And we do know that they have corrected some of their articles and things, because they've either removed them. Chuck O'Neill has documentation on that, showing things where they've removed it. And so, yeah, I mean, they edit the stuff after it gets, pointed out in the public. So I hope that that's it. I hope we never bring up this church again. I don't like doing these things. I know, we have someone else that has a church that went through similar things as you went through. And, he's talked about, maybe having us do like an expose like we did with GFC with that church. I don't really care to do that, because that's really not what Apologetics Live should be. It should be about apologetics, but in a way, this is about apologetics.
Yeah.
I want you to see, how did I handle these things, that the accusations Tony made against us? I played him in his own words. That's what I did. I let him speak and show him in what he has written, what he has said. That's a good thing to do in apologetics when you're accused.
Yeah.
So,
and we are to defend the faith once and for all given to the saints. And we have tried to do that and tried to defend against a church that is doing damage to people. I stand by the fact that Mike Reed is a wolf because of the fact that he hurts so many people. So I stand behind that. And apologetics is defending my position against them on that topic.
Yes. So thank you for coming on. You're always an encouragement. I love talking with you.
Thank you.
For folks, just as a program note, we will not have a show for the next 2 weeks. We'll be back on January 9th, 2025. A new year. So we'll be back. I think the topic for then is immigration. Fun topic. We got a bunch of people that were in a Signal group that I'm in, and they were all debating it. And I said, hey, you guys want to just let's do this. So now I got to go back to the Signal and find which group that was. On the 18th, we're going to be having a debate on ghosts, whether ghosts are demonic or not. So that will be a formal debate that we'll do. And then on the 23rd, I'm going to have Greg Moore from Dead Man Walking podcast come on. He recently had a debate on his channel and with someone that I actually used to go to church with. And so he will be on, and we're going to talk about that debate. So I think that'll be good. So, Kevin, thanks for coming on again. It's always
Thank you, Andrew.
having you on. You're always welcome to come back anytime.
Thank you.
And so my last encouragement is, folks, be praying for Tony, be praying for Mike Reed. And again, I'll do an open appeal again to them. If you think we mischaracterized you, that we said something that's wrong, please reach out to me. You know how to get a hold of me. Both of you know my email. You've used it. You have my number. I'm not hard to find. So, but until next week, remember to strive to make today an eternal day for the glory of God. We'll see you next time.